Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome everybody around the world, around the globe to today's online keynote, today's Icenium online keynote. We're really excited to have you all here today. There are thousands of you tuning in live right now, and we've got some great content to show you, so we're happy to have the next hour to spend with you. Of course, as is the case with any live event with this many people tuning in, if you have any challenges today with the audio or with the video, this entire event is being recorded. It'll be available soon after the live broadcast here on our YouTube page, so stay tuned for that. We'll blog and tweet about it so you can find that on-demand recording if you have any trouble. And of course, if you want the most up-to-date announcement, then you should take a moment and follow us on Twitter at Icenium, ICENIUM, and you'll find out as soon as that recording is available. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. As an additional reminder, just by being part of today's live event, you're in the drawing for some pretty cool swag, some pretty cool raffle prizes that we will be giving away after the live event. If you win, we'll notify you over email. We'll also post the winners online, so we'll let you know who the winners are. As a reminder, the prizes today include 2 new iPads, 2 new iPad minis, 2 Samsung Galaxy 3s, as well as Galaxy 3 minis. Get that straight. So we've got 4 total Samsung Galaxy devices. And of course, we'll be giving away 12 annual subscriptions to Icenium. So there's a great reason to stick around on top of everything else. So we're really excited to have you here. Some great prizes. We'll give those away at the end. And thanks for joining us for today's live event. If I've never had a chance to meet you before on a live event or in person, my name is Todd Anglin, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for today's online keynote. And I'm EVP for cross-platform tools and services here at Telerik, which is building things like Kendo UI, like Icenium, and some of the new stuff we'll show you today. If you have any questions for me about the products or feedback or anything, I always like to hear from customers and from anybody working with our tools. You can find me on Twitter at Todd Anglin, always eager to get your feedback there. I'll have a couple of co-presenters today who I'll introduce as they take the digital stage, and we'll introduce them in a moment. Now, since we originally launched Icenium in October of 2012, we've had a great time learning from you and hearing feedback, and so far, a lot of it's been very positive, and we're really excited to see people building apps, building hybrid apps across platforms using Icenium, and really delivering on that promise that we set out to do, which is to make it easier, to make it simpler to build cross-platform mobile applications. And we've taken all that feedback, we continue to use that to drive the product and move it forward, and we're really excited to reach another milestone with this month's release. And it's worth noting, we're all here essentially because of this statement. We're here because mobile development is hard. And really, if we break that down a bit more granularly, we could say that multi-platform mobile development is hard. And when we say hard, what we really mean is it's complex, it's unfamiliar, it's new to most of us, and it's time-consuming, particularly if you're trying to build mobile apps that reach the largest number of people, which means that they need to run on multiple operating systems. They need to target multiple SDKs, multiple form factors. All of these things make what used to be relatively straightforward, building software for desktops on Windows, suddenly become much, quote-unquote, harder. And we think that you should be able to develop for mobile in the same way you've developed for desktop, that is, to do it efficiently, to do it productively, and to do it having fun. And when anybody sits down to build for mobile development, in fact, they're kind of facing 2 decisions. They would like to have the richness of native, and they would like to have the efficiency of developing for the web, the simplicity of deployment, the ease of maintainability, the ease of upgrading. They would love to have both of these things, but they need a solution for that. And fortunately, one of the leading solutions for that has emerged is the hybrid applications, leveraging the skills of the web with a simple native wrapper to give the web more power of the device. And this has created this new category of hybrid development. We think it's one of the most promising categories for solving this cross-platform development challenge. But while hybrid itself is a technical solution, it is in and of itself not a silver bullet. As a matter of fact, it leaves a lot of things that you, the developer, have to do to be productive, from downloading SDKs, configuring IDEs, all kinds of stuff which really doesn't deliver on everything you need to build for multi-platform mobile. The hybrid promise, in other words, is incomplete. It's a start, but it's not everything you need. So what we've done with Icenium, for those of you who've been around for a while, as a reminder, is we think we can come in and complete the hybrid promise by leveraging the cloud, by delivering a complete solution for taking the hybrid technology core and layering on top of it all the things you need to stop managing software and start building awesome apps. We think we can do that with Icenium in the cloud. But rather than kind of explain that to you, I think it'd be better for you to see it and hear it from one of our developer advocates. So I'm going to welcome to the digital keynote stage my first co-presenter, and he's going to help start us off for today's journey. We'll start by reviewing the core Icenium features. We will then introduce something brand new we've introduced with this latest release, the Icenium Everlive services. Very cool stuff we'll talk about in a minute. And before we wrap up today, we're going to also give you a sneak peek of something coming in a future Icenium release not far from now, just so you can see some of the great innovations that are in the pipeline, and you can see how we're continuously improving Icenium as a platform and as a tool set. So without any further delay, let me invite then my first co-presenter, Rob Lauer, developer advocate on the Icenium team. Rob is available on Twitter for follow-up questions as well at rdlauer. But Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this problem developing across platforms and show us some of how Icenium works. So Rob, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Todd. Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Lauer, and I'm a developer advocate for Icenium. I'd like to spend just a few minutes going over some core concepts of Icenium and hybrid mobile app development in general, and then spend some time diving into Icenium so you can see a live example of creating, testing, and debugging an app in person. So we all know that the marketplace for mobile devices is fractured now between iOS and Android, and it's probably not going to get any better. Some estimates show that by 2016 we could be looking at 3 to 4 dominant players in the mobile space. Assuming this holds true, and I really don't think Microsoft and RIM are going to give up without a fight, we are clearly going to have a dilemma when it comes to our mobile app development strategies. So currently, when we develop native apps that cover the majority of consumer devices out there, we are looking at a situation where we need both a Mac and a PC to take advantage of Xcode, Eclipse, Visual Studio, and so on. We need to learn Objective-C, Java, C#, and XAML to cover all of our bases. We also need to learn a variety of different development environments and use these across different platforms. Most organizations don't have the budget to cover this, so this need has seen the rise of what we call the hybrid mobile app. Most of you know this as PhoneGap or Cordova. Basically, you get to use your existing web skill set to develop HTML5 applications that run on the devices in a native wrapper. But even Cordova-based apps that use HTML, JavaScript, and CSS have their own complexities. You still need a Mac and a PC. You are still going to spend a lot of time setting up your environments, installing, configuring Xcode, Eclipse, Visual Studio, downloading, installing Android developer tools, and so on. And not to mention the drag of publishing to the respective app stores. Now this is where Icenium comes in. Icenium takes away all the pain points of the existing hybrid mobile app development experience and moves this into the cloud. So now we don't care if we're on a Mac or a PC. We don't have to configure any SDKs or compilers. We can just develop our apps, test them, debug them, and publish them. Now in this slide you'll notice that Windows Phone is grayed out. This is because Icenium doesn't support publishing Windows Phone apps yet, but that is on the roadmap for a little later this year. So Icenium allows you to take advantage of your existing HTML, JavaScript, and CSS knowledge and create amazing apps that can span multiple platforms, and this is all with one codebase. Now, this is great and all, but I'm sure some of you are still scratching your heads as you try and imagine what this cloud thing means in the context of hybrid mobile app development. Well, the way you, as a developer, interact with Icenium is through one of two IDEs, Graphite and Mist. Mist is a lightweight but powerful HTML5 based IDE that you access via any major web browser. Graphite, on the other hand, is a robust native Windows application. Now you can use either one and still realize the utility that Icenium provides. You can even go back and forth between the two, since everything you do is saved in the cloud. So even today, Icenium handles every part of the development process for you. Within Graphite or Mist, you can create a project or clone an existing GitHub repo. You can write your code. You can run your app in an integrated simulator and on any devices connected to your computer. You can also test on remote devices using a free product called Icenium Ion. Finally, you can publish your app. And this is all within the Graphite and Mist clients. So now that you have a high-level overview of what Icenium is, I'd like to spend a few minutes creating a new hybrid mobile app in Graphite and show off some of the coolest features that are available to you today. Alright, so here's our Graphite IDE. And the first thing I'd like to show you are the new quick links on the left here. The first is a link to view what's new with the latest release of Icenium. Next, we have our link to the newly redone documentation site, very much worth looking into. And finally, we have a link to our feedback portal, and I strongly encourage you to take a look at this. You can vote up any new features or changes that you deem worthy, or even post your own ideas. Now, by default, Graphite's going to open up to the My Projects pane, but I'd like to show you the clone feature quickly, as this allows you to clone an existing GitHub or Bitbucket repository into an Icenium project. You simply specify the URL to the repository, give it a project name. You may also log into your existing GitHub account and pull in a list of your repositories. There's also a sample project section where you can pull in one of our many useful projects that cover many Cordova and Icenium features. I specifically recommend you check out the Kendo UI mobile music store template. This is a good app to look at when you're architecting any larger project. So in our case, we're going to create a new Icenium project. And now by default, we have a handful of different templates to start with. We can use a blank Cordova project, an Icenium Everlive template, and Jim is going to go into Icenium Everlive a little later. jQuery mobile template, and this is using the latest version of jQuery mobile. Kendo UI mobile template, also the latest version. And finally, a Kendo UI DataVis template, which allows you to develop really rich charting and reporting tools. Now, right now, I'm going to develop a Kendo UI mobile project. So I specify a project name here and create the project. Now we're going to look at what's known as the workspace for Graphite. And you'll probably get familiar with the IDE pretty quickly. On the right, we have our project navigator, contains all of our project assets, HTML, so on. We have the main menu. We can go back to the dashboard and return. We can add new files or folders. We can save our changes, run the app on a physical device or a simulator. Integrated version control, and of course publishing. I'll show you all this in more detail later. In addition, if you're constrained by space, we can condense our menus here, especially in a webinar situation where I have a limited resolution. But let's open up some of our application assets and see what we can do. You'll see that Graphite includes syntax highlighting by default. There's also auto-completion built in. So we can just start typing our div element, and you'll see right away we get our auto-completion popping up. This is available in the CSS and JavaScript as well. For example, let me open up a CSS file here. You'll see the syntax highlighting is built in. Same goes for JavaScript, syntax highlighting. Let me show you an example of auto-completion in the CSS. So I'll just typing in a color. So pretty much what you'd expect. All this is going to be familiar to anybody who's used to working with a modern IDE, right? Now before we get into our code, I'd like to take a quick look at our project properties. And this is where we're going to set up some configuration and build options for our iOS and Android apps. Let's take a quick peek. So here we can specify which version of Cordova we want to use for our project. We can set the app identifier, and this is going to be part of your bundle ID in iOS, and the version of the app which we control. We can also specify which device orientations we support. So for this example, let's just say we want a portrait for this app. Let's look at the iOS tab. Here we can specify our code signing identity. We can set the style of our status bar and give a display name to how our app would show up on the device. In my case, let's call it Icenium Webinar. Now we can also specify which iOS devices we want to allow the app to be installed on. So we could say iPhone, iPod, or iPad, or both. New with this release is the ability to specify a background mode for our app. So say for example, we were developing a music app and wanted to allow the user to play audio when the app was in the background. We could enable that functionality here, and there's other options available for you as well. In addition, we can specify launch icons for both iPhone and iPad. You'll see all the different resolutions here are available. Same idea goes for the iPhone and iPad splash screens as well. So again, you'll see all the different resolutions that you'll have to update. Now, the Android tab is a similar setup. Over here you can manage your code signing identity for when you publish your app. You can increment your version code for when you have new releases. You can also enable or disable hardware acceleration, which is worth testing out. You can specify permissions for your app. And usually with an Android app, you want to minimize the permissions that you request of a user when they install your Android app. And Icenium allows you to manage these right here. So say for example, we want to remove the ability to use the vibration feature. We just remove it right here. We also can go in and add any previously removed permissions or some new permissions using the little add button there. Same with iOS. You can edit your icon and splash screen images right here. Very simple to do. Now, probably my favorite part of Graphite is the ability to include Cordova plugins in your app. Now, right now we offer 4 popular plugins, and with an upcoming release, we'll offer the ability to easily include custom Cordova plugins. If you've dealt with plugins before, you can probably imagine how useful this can be. So let's say we wanted to include the child browser plugin, and this basically allows you to spawn a browser window inside of your app. This is probably the single most popular plugin available today. We have the ability to specify which version of the plugin we'd like to use using the drop-down menu right here. And what's great here is we get a warning if we try to use a version of the plugin that is incompatible with the version of Cordova that we already chose. So we get a little prompt there to make sure we're using a compatible version. In addition, we can verify cross-platform compatibility, so it's going to tell you which platforms that it works with. And finally, we have a little info button here that shows you a prompt with more information about the plugin and a link to the documentation. So enough of the project properties. Let's jump back to our code and see what our Kendo UI Mobile Icenium project looks like. Now, since this is a Kendo UI Mobile project, our 2 Kendo UI Mobile assets, or CSS and JavaScript, are included by default here. In addition, we have 3 Kendo UI Mobile views here. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Kendo UI Mobile view here, it's a div element denoted by a data role attribute with a view. These views are basically just the 3 separate pages of our app. And we'll see what this really means when we get into the simulator. At the bottom, we also have a mobile layout, which allows us to specify one layout for multiple views with a common header and footer elements. And you can see in our header, we have a navigation bar. And in our footer, we have a Kendo UI Mobile tab strip, which provides a native-looking tabbed interface for navigation purposes. Finally, at the bottom, we simply initialize our Kendo UI Mobile app. And we're going to provide a default transition of slide to make this feel even more like a native app. So there's our code. I think things will start to gel a little bit more if we take a look at the integrated device simulator. Now, this is an awesome piece of work, and it lets us fully simulate an Icenium app to test functionality in our UI across different platforms and OS versions. We can use the menu up here to switch between different devices and platforms and OS versions, and I'll get to that in a second. So let's take a look at our app. We can navigate through our app just like it's running on a device. You can see the smooth transitions as we navigate around. Very much what you'd expect. I can type my name in here, submit it. Everything works as we'd expect, right? Now I want to show you the power of the simulator plus Kendo UI Mobile. So when I switch over to Android, you'll see that my UI automatically changes to conform to the Android UI specifications. Everything works the same transitions, same native feel. You can also choose different devices, choose older OS versions if you want to test those. Some other useful tools in the simulator, the ability to switch the orientation of our device. We can flip it over, we can turn it 90 degrees. But wait, remember that we specified this app as portrait only. That's why we aren't seeing it actually switch to the landscape mode. We have the ability to refresh and reload. Now, this actually isn't necessarily needed, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Finally, we have the debug tools. Now, if you're familiar with the Chrome debugging tools, you'll be right at home here. Everything you're used to as part of that tool set is right here in the simulator. We can open this up, we can inspect all the elements that are HTML. So just like you're inspecting a regular web application, all those tools are available here. We can dive down, dig in further into the DOM. We can tweak our CSS over here and so on. So very useful tools, very good way to debug your application. The Resources tab, this is going to show us anything we're storing with the app. Maybe we have a SQLite database or local storage we want to inspect. We can check for any network latency issues under the Network tab if we're loading external resources. We can debug our JavaScript. We can work on our timelines. We can profile our JavaScript. We can run audits. So everything you're used to in Chrome is available here. And obviously we have our trusty console. So I'd like to take a minute to show off one of my favorite features of Icenium, and that is Live Sync. Now, Live Sync allows us to make a change to any part of our app, be it HTML, JavaScript, or CSS, and have that change show up instantly in our simulator or any connected device. It's a little hard to show in the smaller resolution, but I can go in here. Let's change some text, save it, go back to our simulator. There it is right away. And that's without using those refresh or reload buttons that I showed you before. So like I said, the same thing applies to CSS and JavaScript. Let me go in here and I will change. I'm going to go in and change, let's see, this. I'm going to change the background of that input box. So let's change that to red. So I make the change, I save it, boom, it's made instantly. This is a wonderful way to tweak your CSS and see the results immediately. Same thing goes if I made any change to my Hello World JavaScript asset here, that too would show up immediately. Now, the simulator is obviously awesome. It's an incredibly useful tool for debugging and testing your app. However, we all know that nothing can replace testing on a physical device. Luckily, that is built into a Graphite as well. So I'm going to access the Run menu here. And this time I'm going to choose Run on Device. Now, since I'm building and running on the device for the first time, the app is going to compile in the cloud. And you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, it says building and deploying. And once it's done building, it's going to get installed on the device. You'll see it takes a few seconds to get up and running initially. This is just a one-time thing. The first time you get it set up and running, there it goes. Now I'm also going to get picture-in-picture going in here so you can actually see it running on my iPhone that's connected to my PC here. And at this point, okay, the app is built and it's installed on my phone. Now comes the fun part of a webinar, getting mirroring to work. Bear with me for just a second here. There we go. Okay, here we go. So we're looking at my phone mirrored on my PC. Now let me navigate to the app, which is already installed on my device. And you'll see it's installed just like any other app. There it is, Icenium Webinar. So it works just like any other app. The navigation is really smooth. Maybe I should use my finger, not my mouse. There we go. Navigation is smooth. Let me refresh my location here. You'll see where I live. And just like with the simulator, Live Sync is also enabled by default. So let's change that welcome text back here. And then when we save it, we'll switch over to the device. And you'll see the change showed up right away. I didn't have to rebuild or reload the app or anything like that. Now, I neglected to show you the device manager when I first plugged in my phone. This lets you view all the connected devices on your machine. And you'll see that Project Live Sync on the right is enabled by default, as well as Ion Live Sync. I'll get to what Ion is exactly in just a minute. Another bonus, if you're testing on a provisioned iOS 6 device, we have another little treat to show you. If you enable the Web Inspector in the Safari settings on your device, you can actually debug using the debugging tools on your device. It's kind of hard to show you with the limited screen real estate here. But you'll see that when I mouse over some elements here, I get the highlighting on my device. So the same Chrome tools that we could use with the simulator, all those are available on our device. This is just an amazingly useful debugging tool. So I'd like to show you one final way to test on a device, and that is using Icenium Ion. Now Ion is a free app that you can download from the iOS App Store, and with it you can test on basically any iOS device just by scanning a QR code. So to demo this, I'm going to pop over to my web browser and log into Mist, which is the other Icenium client. And let me log in here quickly. And watch me get my password wrong here. Of course. And here we go. This time I promise it's going to work. There we go. So I'm going to open up my project we've just been working on. Remember, everything is saved in the cloud, so I can access it within Mist. I'm not going to show you all of Mist, of course, but you can see that the UI is almost identical to Graphite. So here we're going to run on a device, and this time I'm going to choose Icenium Ion. So Icenium Ion is really great if you don't have a provisioned iOS device, or if you want to test on a device that is not physically connected to your machine. So what we're provided here is a QR code that we can scan with any old QR reader app on our device. So let me switch back over to my phone now. And you'll see I have Icenium Ion already installed from the App Store. Now the way I load this app into Ion on my device is just to go back, and I'm going to launch my QR reader app. Let me not use my mouse again and launch my QR reader app. And all I'm going to do is simply scan the QR code, right? There we go. So now my app is immediately installed on my device within the Ion container, and I can run it just like any other app. So just as we expect it to run, same way as if I was running it as a connected device with Graphite. Now with Ion, if you make a change to your app and you need to reload it, all you do is simply hold down 3 fingers on the app, and it'll automatically go out and download a new build. It takes maybe 1 or 2 seconds. So another really important feature built into Icenium is version control. Now by default, your Icenium project is checked into an internal Icenium repository in the cloud. You can make commits, view history, all that good stuff. So when I make a change and save a file, a little M icon is going to show up, and this tells me that my file has been modified since my last commit. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to use the Diff Tool here and see what has changed since my last commit. So I can see, obviously I changed the casing of my W on my background color here. Now let's go in and go ahead and here and make a commit. So we need to add a comment. So we'll call this my initial app edits. And we'll make a commit. And let's take a look at the history. Oops, I didn't actually save my commit. Let's go back here and save my commit. There we go. Now if I navigate to my history pane, I'll see there's my commit, there's the projects that the files that were changed. You can see what's changed between commits and so on. If I had any conflicts between files, they would show up here. So if I had edited a file in my GitHub repo externally or something like that, we could resolve conflicts there. We can go and we can look at the history of a file. We can look at a diff between history. Again, same thing I showed you before. Really pretty powerful version control features already baked in to Graphite. We can also roll back any changes, of course. Now from our main version control menu here, you can see that we can view our history, we can submit pull requests, and so on. We know a lot of you already use Git-based repositories like GitHub and Bitbucket, and if you have an existing repo, you can use that by adding the URL to the repository right here. Simply insert the URL to the repository, save it, and you're good to go. So far we've developed an app. We tested, debugged, all that good stuff. Now we're obviously going to want to publish it to the app stores. As part of the end-to-end story of Icenium, you'll see that we can publish your app right through the Graphite interface here. You simply choose a platform one at a time, and the IDE will walk through the process of using a friendly wizard-like interface. So Graphite will prompt you with alerts whenever you need to act on something. And like I said, everything is done within the IDE here, except for the very final uploading of your application, which has to be done through the respective app stores. But that's simply uploading the IPA or APA packages. Now, one last thing I forgot to show you are some of the Graphite options. So I'm going to really briefly go over these. Now in the iOS tab here, we can see that we can manage all of our provisioned iOS devices right within the IDE. There are many advanced settings, so if you're familiar with Visual Studio or an IDE like that, you can see how you can go in, you can change really granular settings for your code editor, change some code analysis, warning settings. So some resharper or just code like features are built in as well. You can change those settings here. Obviously, I'm glossing over these settings, but I suggest you really take a good look at them. So that's about it. I hope you've learned a little bit more about Icenium Graphite. Thanks for listening, and I'll send it back to you, Todd.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rob. And that was a whirlwind tour of a lot of functionality that Icenium provides, from the way you can create projects, the way you can debug projects, publish projects. If you want to start trying any of that for yourself, if you're tuning out of the Keynote, you'd rather just get your hands on it, you can do that immediately by going to icenium.com, sign up for your free trial, and you can start playing around with those features in Icenium Mist or Icenium Graphite and start checking it out right away. So thank you, Rob, very much for that introduction to the core features of Icenium. Now, while so far what we've looked at is the Icenium core features and things we've been delivering for a while now, things that help you solve that problem of building cross-platform applications, the front end of the application, the stuff that runs on the device, any application of significance eventually ends up talking to a server. We need to talk to servers for creating and managing users, authenticating users, saving and loading data beyond just the temporary data we have on a device, and even things that we just simply can't do from a device, like sending an email or server-side data input validation. All these things traditionally require a developer to set down the mobile development skill set and then figure out how and where to acquire a server, how and where to create web services, what language, what operating system to run on. Should it be Node? Should it be .NET? Should it be PHP? And then, of course, all the other things that go along with that. Securing the services, creating a user management system. All of these things are relatively standard, and almost every mobile app at some point has to do a collection of these things that just saps that productivity out of the mobile development process again. So what we wanted to do with Icenium is say, if we're really going to make it easy for you to build a complete application across platforms, we can't just stop at the front end. We need to bring together the productivity that we've delivered for the front end. We need to combine that with productivity for the back end. So what we're introducing with this release is a preview of something we're calling the Icenium Everlive backend services. And here to tell you all about that, what they do, and how they work is our next guest presenter, Jim Cowart, developer advocate on Icenium as well. You can find him on Twitter, @and_else, to answer any follow-up questions. But Jim's going to introduce us for the first time to Icenium Everlive backend services and show you in context how they can help you make managing the back end of your application process as simple as Icenium makes managing the front-end development. So Jim, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks to everybody watching. So as Todd mentioned, I'm going to share a bit about Icenium Everlive, a very exciting feature we've included in this release. So, what is Everlive? By now, you've probably heard the phrase backend as a service. That's a pretty good start in describing what Everlive is. But let's dig a little deeper and look at a high-level list of features before we get to some code. Everlive provides cloud-based data and file storage, and in addition to these, you get user management, and the ability to hook custom code into the pipeline of these services to do things like server-side validation, record transformation, and so on. You also get a management portal for your Everlive-backed apps and email notifications. Now, all of these services are exposed through a RESTful API, but there's also .NET SDKs that you can download, and there's a JavaScript library that provides an intuitive client-side wrapper for working with Everlive. Since we're talking hybrid mobile today, our focus is going to be on using the JavaScript library. But overall, you can see that Everlive provides a pretty substantial set of backend functionality. It's ready for you to use. All you've got to do is create a project and start storing data, which we're going to do in just a second. Speaking of creating projects, since it's part of Icenium, Everlive is integrated into the browser-based Mist IDE, as well as Graphite if you prefer the Windows Desktop IDE. For the sake of what we're doing today, we're going to focus on using Mist. To show off these features, though, I'm going to put together a basic note-taking mobile app. We'll start with simply viewing a list of notes with Everlive as the backend data store. Then we'll add the ability to look at a specific note and create new notes and store them in Everlive. And then we'll also tie in Everlive's user management features for authentication. And then we'll take a brief look at adding cloud code for server-side validation. By the time we're done, you'll have a good idea of how using Everlive can speed up your development time, because we're providing you infrastructure that you'd otherwise have to build on your own. And you'll also see how it can help relieve the headaches of keeping the application data in sync between devices and more. So let me switch over to my browser. The first thing we're going to do is open Mist. Now, normally, if we were starting from scratch to create a new project to work with Everlive Cloud Services, we'd go to New and pick the new project type that's listed here, the second option, Icenium Everlive Cloud Services. This actually gives you a project that's pre-configured to use Everlive, so it plugs in an app-specific API key. It'll add the Everlive client JavaScript library and ultimately give you a sample app that uses Kendo UI Mobile and Everlive. We don't need all the stuff that comes with the sample app though, so what I've done instead is I have a project where I've trimmed that out, so we're going to open up my projects instead, and then we're going to open up the Note Taker demo project. So right now, the app has just enough to run and show us a placeholder message of where's the app. Alright, so there's not a lot going on here yet, but let's look at the main.js file. The first 30 lines or so are some Icenium generated boilerplate to deal with errors. So we plug in a nice pop-up if we get an error while we're running in the simulator. And then we also put in a check to make sure, did we really intend to back up in the browser history prior to when this was loaded and so on. But we're not really interested in that. Let's skip down to the good stuff. Starting on line 37 is where we have some interesting things happening here. We have an application settings object with our Everlive API key there on line 40. And then on line 44, we're creating a new instance of our Everlive API, and we're passing in that API key. And this is actually setting up some communications plumbing for us to make sure that we're talking to the right Everlive backend. And then on line 48, we're newing up a new Kendo mobile application. Now, these were all plugged in by Icenium because we chose the Everlive Cloud Services project. The Kendo UI Mobile framework is default when you choose that, but you don't have to use Kendo UI Mobile if you want to work with Everlive. We're going to use it, though, because we love it, and it was plugged in for us automatically, so that was nice. Now, we wanted to turn this into a note-taking app. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we can upload files from an archive. We're going to upload some new code. So a couple of things got changed. We added some stuff to our index.html now that can show a list of notes. And then let's look at our JavaScript and see what changed here as well. You'll notice we've added a view model here on line 51. Now, the notes view model is just an object with a notes property, and that notes property is a Kendo data source. Now, if you're familiar with Kendo UI, in general, you probably know what data sources are, but just in a nutshell, a data source is an abstraction that allows you to bind any Kendo UI control to any data source. So in this case, I'm not doing anything other than hard coding some data. So you can see as I new up my Kendo data source, I'm telling it its data is this array of 2 fake notes. Not a big deal, but this is just an easy way to quickly mock and stub out some data so I can see if my UI looks anywhere near like I want it to. So we should be able to run this. And there we see our 2 test notes. So that's fine, but we're not talking to Everlive yet, and we want to get these notes from Everlive. So in order to do that, we actually need to go to Everlive and tell it what a note is. So in other words, we need to create a note content type. The nice thing is Everlive's integrated with Mist. So if you look over here to the right, we have a data navigator icon. We can click on that, and it'll show us a list of our Everlive projects. So here's our note taker demo. If we expand it, we'd see the content types. Right now, we only have users, and that's because that's built into Everlive. I'm not terribly interested in users yet, but you can at least see that if we expand it and click on the fields, that the properties below will change, tell us information about that. But what we want to do is go to the Everlive dashboard for this project. So we right-click it and choose Show Application. Now this takes us to the management portal for this particular Everlive application. You can see there's quite a bit we can do here. We can create content types. There's some links to documentation and downloads for SDKs and so on. But what we want to do right now is create a content type for notes. So we're going to call it notes. And notice that we actually get 5 fields baked into each content type already. The ID, created by, modified by, created at, modified at. It's nice that that's provided out of the box for you. Now we want to add a title for our note. We're going to choose text, but this will give you an idea of some of the other data types that are built in. Number, date and time, yes, no, file, geopoint, object. Relation is exactly what it sounds like too. It's a way to define relationships between content types and also array. So we're going to go with text and add that. Then we're going to add the text content of our note. And we're going to save. So now we'd see a list of notes if we had any. We just created it, so we don't have any yet. So let's add one. All right, and we save it. Now we can see on the left pane the note listed, and if you click on it, you see the detail on the right side. Shows you the ID, you see the created by, modified, and created at, modified at, and so on. We're going to add another just to have a couple. Now, we have these notes, but we need to actually update some permissions. So if you notice that we have this gear icon here, if we click on that, this would allow us to go edit the structure or update the cloud code, which we'll look at in a little bit, or the permissions. So let's go to permissions, and you'll notice that right now only registered users can do anything. Now, we just want to view the notes in our application, make sure everything's working right. So we're going to temporarily allow anonymous read connections. We save that. And now all we need to do is go back to our application and change our data source and get it to talk to Everlive instead of the stubbed data that we put in there. So let's look at that. So we're going to replace this JavaScript right here with a little bit more code. Now let's look at what we've added. So we're using a module pattern for our notes model on line 50, and inside that we're declaring a note model, and that's going to act as the schema for an individual note that's going to be used by our data source down here on line 77. So line 77 has our updated Kendo data source. We're not hard coding data anymore. Instead, we have a data source that has a type of Everlive, and this is available because we are using Everlive alongside Kendo UI Mobile. And then the schema for the data source is being told to use the note model above. Transport type name is notes. This is important because it matches the content type we created in Everlive. Then we've got a change method that fires when the data source changes, and then also how to sort it. Now on line 101, we have our notes view model. Right now it's just returning an object that has our data source, but we'll be adding more behavior to that as we update the code. But as it stands, we can actually run this and talk to Everlive now. So let me save it and run it in the simulator. We can see the two notes that we created. Fantastic. Okay, now we can actually view the notes, the list of notes as an anonymous user, but we need to add the ability to see an individual note as well as to create a note. So let's go ahead and take advantage of the fact that we can upload from an archive again. We're going to select our next zip here. Now you have to forgive me, I compressed these files on my Mac, so we're going to see some unfortunate artifacts. The woes of DS Store on Mac. But you'll notice here that we've got two new views, the Add Note view and the Note view. So this is for viewing individual notes. This is for adding a note. And if we look at our JavaScript, we'll see a couple of new things added here as well. There's more Mac artifacts for compression. But in our main.js, we actually have a Note view model and an Add Note view model. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. I'm just saying that it's the backing state and behavior for these two new views that we added. So we actually have enough to run right now. So let's run it and see what things look like. So you can see that we can click on a note and see the individual detail. We can also try to add a note. Now, this will not work because we haven't granted anonymous users the rights to create a note inside Everlive. So now is the ideal time for us to go ahead and add the assets that we need to tie user management into our application. So to do that, we're going to jump back over and upload yet another archive. Select our last zip file here. Now this is actually going to give our app the assets that it needs to not only log in, like it'll have the login form, but it's also going to give us a user registration view. So let's take a look at all that. So notice under views, now I have a sign up view as well. And notice that notes view has appeared, and that used to be in our index.html. So this is the notes list. This is our sign up form where we register. And now our index.html actually has our login screen. So we can run this, but before we do, let's pull up the main.js real quick and see what's changed inside it. So here on line 63, we have the users model. And this is responsible for getting information about the current user as well as all the users associated with the app in Everlive. So we're not going to spend too much time on this, but I want you to see a couple of the Everlive client library calls happening. So if you notice on line 67, we're making a call to el.users.currentUser, and this is a way to get the current user. And this returns a promise, so in our then callback, once we have the current user, we can do some stuff with that. And then you'll notice on line 72, we make a call to el.users.get. This actually gets all of the users associated with the app in Everlive. And that also returns a promise. So in the then callback, then we can do something with the user's data and so on. Down here in the login view model, this is the behavior for logging in. You'll notice that we're making another call to the Everlive client API, el.users.login, and then we pass the username and password that the user entered. That also returns a promise. So once that successfully returns, we can continue on with our work. One other thing we'll look at real quick is the signup view model. This is the backing state and behavior for our signup view. And this is when the form a user fills out when they register. And you'll notice here in the signup method, we're making a call against the Everlive client API via el.users.register. And we pass in the username and password that the user wants, as well as the additional data they filled out on the form. And that, just like the other calls, returns a promise so that once it's successfully processed, we can show an alert saying that they were successfully registered or not, or show an error if there was a problem. So that's a quick whirlwind tour. We do have enough to run, so let's run this real quick and see what it looks like. We've never logged in before, so if we attempt to do so, we should see an error message. And of course we do. Invalid username or password. So we can scroll down and choose the sign up option. So we'll enter our name. Feel bad if there really is someone at somewhere.com. And password. And we'll register. Fantastic. So it says registration successful. So now it takes us back to the home screen. Now we can log in. So here we go. We can see our notes. So far, everything that's been entered is anonymous. So we can look at the individual ones. Now we should be able to add a note. So let's say authentication for the win. Save note. There you go. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we have the ability to add what we call cloud code, which is basically custom JavaScript that you can insert at particular points in time as you're doing CRUD operations. So let's go back to Mist. Let's go to our Everlive dashboard, which we actually still have open here in the background. And let's look at the cloud code for our notes content type. Now you can see here that this gives you basically a before and after hook for each CRUD operation. So before, after read, before and after create, before and after update, and before and after delete. So we're going to just throw in a test one for before create, and we're going to do some server-side validation. So notice there on line 13, the before create method takes a function that has 3 arguments: request, context, and done. Request contains information about the current request being made. Context is actually something we can use to pass data onto the after event, so in this case the after create hook if we needed to. And then done is a callback that you have to invoke in order to let Everlive know to continue processing the request, otherwise it'll time out since all of this is happening asynchronously, of course. Then on line 14, we're checking to see if our request.data.title is truthy, so do we have a title? And then we're taking advantage of some helpers that Everlive has under the everlive.validation namespace. So we're using validate alphanumeric to verify that our title is only alphanumeric characters and doesn't have special characters or spaces. And if that fails validation, then we'll drop into line 15 and use a convenience wrapper to send a response back to the client with an error. And that's everlive.response.set error result. First argument there is obviously our error message. The second arg is just an app-specific error code, and then the last one is the HTTP response code. All right, let's save this, and then we'll go back to Mist and run our simulator and try to enter a note that will fail validation on the title. First, we got to log back in. So this is going to fail because the title field can only contain letters and numbers. There we go. So that's just a real quick and dirty introduction to cloud code, but you can do a lot with that. Not just server-side validation, you can do record transformation, you can log events, that sort of thing. And one of the things that's worth mentioning, we don't have time to go into it right now, but if you go to your Everlive portal homepage for your project, you'll see this cloud code log link. So Everlive actually keeps a log of your CRUD operations, and when the event hooks get triggered, it stores the state of the request at the time and anything you've console logged inside your cloud code and so on. It's a really useful tool. Okay, now there's one other thing I wanted to show, and that is actually running our note-taking app on a mobile device and seeing it interact with Everlive. So to do that, we're going to go back over to Mist, and I'm going to use Icenium Ion to run this on my actual iPhone 5, and this is Reflector app showing my iPhone 5. We're going to launch Icenium Ion on the iPhone and scan this QR code. Then it's going to download the latest version of the app so we can actually run it on my iPhone. And you can see here on the screen that we'll be able to log in. So here we go. Log in. Nice. So we can look at individual notes. We can add a new note. Save note. There we go. Now, to show that keeping data in sync between devices is really as simple as you probably think it is, we're going to run the iPad simulator again. We're going to log into it as well. And we're going to show these guys side by side. Now remember, we said we couldn't use spaces, so we got to back that out. We're going to save our note. Now if I pull and refresh, there you go. So you can see Everlive saved us a ton of time, made it really easy to get off the ground, sharing data between devices, taking advantage of the user administration features, as well as the other things that it can do for us. It's a huge productivity gain. But unfortunately with that, I am out of time. We've crammed a ton of stuff in, but we've really just begun to scratch the surface. We haven't even talked about the usage metrics you can get through the Everlive portal, or the fact that you can update your email templates that Everlive uses to send email to your users. But we at least did what we came here to do. You got the whirlwind tour of Everlive features, how it's integrated with Icenium Mist. You get to see our note-taking sample app run not only in browser and talking to Everlive, but also on an actual iPhone. So we're really excited about the kinds of productivity gains we feel like that using something like Everlive can bring you as you develop hybrid mobile apps. Definitely encourage you to watch the blogs for the code. We're going to blog about this more in the future and make sure that the sample app's available on GitHub for you to play with. Thanks a ton for listening, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Todd. Todd, it's all yours.
Cool stuff. Thank you, Jim, very much. Everything you've seen so far right now, including Icenium Everlive, all the core features you've seen in Icenium Mist and Graphite and across the platform, the build services, are available today for $16 per month per developer. That's 4 cups of your average Starbucks coffee for some incredible tools that greatly simplify not only building the front end of your application, but also building now the back end web services as well. So there are subscriptions starting at $16 per month per developer. We finally graduated from our 6-month free trial. You can check that out now. And for 4 cups of coffee, you can have yourself an incredible tool set. In fact, there's one other thing we're introducing with this release. Since the introduction of Icenium, we've made available to Icenium customers a complimentary license to Kendo UI Mobile. And for the higher level subscriptions for Icenium with this release, we're adding additional value to that subscription by now also including a complimentary license to Kendo UI DataViz, a $399 additional value built into all of the higher level subscriptions for Icenium. So if you needed any more incentive to check out these subscriptions today, Icenium customers will now have access to Kendo UI Mobile and Kendo UI DataViz. And for those of you not familiar with Kendo UI, it's an incredible HTML5 and JavaScript framework built by Telerik. You can check that out and more at kendoui.com. But before we wrap up today, I mentioned early on in today's webcast that Icenium is continuously improving. In fact, we ship new value and new features in Icenium almost every 6 weeks. And so if you've been using the tool during the free trial, you've noticed that on a regular basis, we are shipping improvements across the entire collection of tools and services that power Icenium. And now that we've reached this new point, this new milestone, that certainly isn't changing. In fact, if anything, we're going to pick up the pace and deliver even more value to you on a regular basis. In fact, in 2013 on the roadmap, you'll see things like command line APIs for the Icenium services, Visual Studio integration for those of you that want to work with Icenium in your own IDEs. We know that's a big request. We're working on delivering that soon, very soon. Adding another platform in the form of Windows Phone 8 support, joining Android and iOS. And when we add platforms, it's not just about building a package and giving it back to you like some tools do. This is about giving you that same kind of workflow, the simulators, the debugging experience, the deploy and publish experience. We'll be doing that for Windows Phone 8. And another big request we know a lot of people have been asking for, support for custom Cordova plugins in the build process in Icenium in the cloud. And I said early on, we want to give you a sneak peek of one of these things. One of these is coming up very soon in our next iteration, and that is the custom Cordova plugins. We'll be here very, very soon. And to give you a sneak peek of how that's going to work in Icenium, I'm going to re-invite to the stage Rob Lauer to show us a sneak peek of this upcoming feature in Icenium and how we're going to support custom plugins in our build environment. So Rob, why don't you show us a sneak peek of something pretty cool coming up?
Thanks, Todd. Hi again, everybody. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to show you a really exciting feature that's coming up in the next version of Icenium, and that is the ability to install a custom plugin with your Icenium project. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my browser and I'm going to navigate to the GitHub repo for a particular plugin that I'm interested in, which happens to be the iOS Keychain plugin. I'm going to go ahead and download this plugin as a zip archive. And I'm going to pop back over to Icenium Graphite here, and I'm going to create a new blank project. Now, first thing you're going to do is you're going to right-click on plugins, and you're going to add that archive. Simply select it, import it. It's going to upload and unpack it. There we go. Let's expand the plugins directory. I'm going to go ahead and rename this directory to remove the master branch from the title. And then we're going to navigate to the plugin.xml, and this is where we configure the plugin. And since we're using a version of Cordova, we're using 2.4 in this situation. So I'm going to uncomment the section for 2.4, and I'm going to comment out the section here that's only for Cordova 2.5. And then I'm going to save this file. And then we are going to cheat, and we are going to use their example HTML file. Let me pop that open here, and I'm going to select everything here, and I'm going to paste this into our original index.html. Now, the one other thing I have to do here, I just have to change the reference from the specific version of Cordova to the generic reference that we use in Icenium. And at this point, I should be all set, and I can run this on my device. And now we have to wait for it to build and deploy again. And again, since it's the first time I'm doing this, it's going to take a little longer to push everything up to the cloud, build it, and send it back to my device here. And while we're waiting, in case you're not familiar with the iOS Keychain Cordova plugin does, it provides you an interface to Keychain in iOS, which is a way to securely store and manage credentials. So a good example of this is if you wanted to store credentials alongside your app, you could actually store these using the Keychain plugin instead of using something that's not secure like local storage. So there we go. Now it's copying to my device. And again, this is just a one-time thing. So now let me get the picture-in-picture running so you can see it actually running on my device. There we go. So we're mirroring my iPhone again. We're going to open up this test app we just created, and there we go. So this is going to show you the functionality, the Keychain functionality. So we can go in here and we can set a key value pair. We're also able to retrieve that key value pair back. And finally, show you how you can remove that key. This is all using iOS's built-in Keychain functionality to store and get and remove credentials securely. Again, custom plugins coming in the next version of Icenium. And that's about it for me. I'll send it back to you again, Todd.
Thank you very much, Rob. Hopefully you think that's as cool as I do. That's a pretty cool thing. If you've been looking to use Icenium and you need to use your own plugins, you will have a way to do that, again, very soon. Next iteration, you'll see that feature land. So we've looked at the core Icenium features today. We've taken a look for the first time at Icenium Everlive's backend services and how that can help you simplify the backend user management, data storage, sending emails, all those great things. And we've just taken a sneak peek at an upcoming feature in Icenium with our support for custom Cordova plugins. It's a whirlwind tour of some very valuable tools if you're considering any kind of mobile development. We certainly hope that you will check them out. At this point, I want to make you all aware of something special we're doing just for today's live webcast Keynote attendees. If you use the following discount code by June 28th, so you have to move kind of quickly, we will give you a 20% discount on annual subscriptions for Icenium. So a special thank you for every single one of you, the thousands of you here today, for joining us for this keynote. Use that code by June 28th. Take advantage of this 20% discount, and hopefully you'll find the productivity we're talking about as you set out to build these multi-platform mobile apps. And with that, there's only one thing left to do. Go to Icenium.com today, start your free 30-day trial. That's available to everyone. Check it out. See how Icenium Mist and Graphite and Icenium Ion on your iOS devices help you build, debug, deploy your cross-platform mobile apps. We really appreciate you joining us today. many of you, especially in time zones where I know it's very late. We're now going to transition to a live Q&A to follow up all this great content today. There'll be a slight transition as we activate the Q&A system. If you have any questions, now would be a great time to start logging those in the Q&A so that we can go through them here in this kind of live exchange. I know we've been answering many of them if we've been going along today. For those of you that need to drop off and don't want to stay around for the live Q&A, thank you again very much for attending. The on-demand recording of this will be on our YouTube channel very soon, and we hope to see you at the next Icenium Online Keynote. Thank you.